right? And so collecting that revenue, there's cash collection. So you have to work with the treasury teams to make sure that, if that company is still continuing to sell on their end, you need to make sure that they're remitting the cash to company A's books. But in terms of integration, it's the same thing. So it's just figuring out how best to integrate this process so that when company A sells the products of company B, everything is seamless. So the SKUs are recorded appropriately. The billing, so the invoicing goes out to the right customer with the right names. And as part of invoicing, there's also something here called customer onboarding, right? So you can't just onboard a customer just because they're required from company A. You still have to do the process of checking to make sure that there aren't any trade restrictions with that company, checking to make sure that their credit is good, because again, just because company B had them as a customer doesn't mean that they reach your own thresholds, right, as a company A for credit. So there's customer onboarding that also needs to be done as part of this billing integration. And then you get to the finance integration, again, working with finance teams to ensure that cash collection is integrated on their end, and all the revenue reporting as well.
Hey, what up, fam? This is Lebbie, host of Africans in Tech, where we're building bridges and shaping futures in tech. On our pod today, we got Jennifer. She's going to be talking about M&A, merger and acquisition. So for those of you who are not familiar, think about when a company buys another company, sort of like the things behind that happens. So she does that from a program management standpoint. So this would be a really dope episode for you to track kind of what goes on behind the scenes. So Jennifer, off to you.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to start with just kind of defining what M&A is. So M&A is obviously mergers and acquisitions. And so a merger is essentially a process where a company A merges with company B and basically just says, hey, let's come together and build something together, right? So you keep your own structure, you're still your own entity, and there's really nothing really changes majorly other than we're probably going to be sharing revenues. Whereas an acquisition is where company A decides that they want to buy company B. I can spell, I promise. Company B, and that means they have ownership of the company. So there are two types of acquisitions, right? So in some cases, company A can say, all right, company B, we own you from a financial reporting perspective. So on paper, when we're reporting our revenues and whatnot, all your earnings are going to be rolled up into our financial statements, right? So that's sort of what it's called I'll just call it a standalone acquisition. So it's kind of not like a merger where everyone stays on their own, but it's more like we've acquired this company, legally we're responsible for the company, but they're going to be their own name, they're going to have their own brand, their own employees. An example of that is Microsoft and LinkedIn. So Microsoft acquired LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is still its own separate entity. But then on the financial statements, you'll find that LinkedIn's business actually rolls into Microsoft as part of the revenue. And then there's another type of acquisition called, I'll just call it a full integration. Sometimes it's also called a business acquisition. Just put in brackets, business acquisition. So that basically just says that we've acquired, so company A has acquired this company B because we want to actually sell their products as part of our product. So company B will essentially cease to exist, so you wouldn't be able to search them on their website. Their employees are now going to be Company A's employees. Their products are going to be part of Company A's products, and even their invoices. So when you get an invoice, it's going to say Company A and not Company B. So those are sort of the two major types of acquisitions. Of course, there's also a partial integration as well, but for the purpose of today, we're just going to talk about the full integration here. This is what I do.
Okay.
So for the full integration, really what that means, like I mentioned, is you're selling their products. So there's going to be a product or tech integration. So product integration. There's going to be people integration. So you have to integrate their employees. So HR integration. And then there's going to be, operations integration, which is what I do. And under operations integration, there's even more. I don't think, can I
Yeah.
clean? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll wipe this. All right. So operations integration, in this case, and what I do, it entails, so basically what operations is we're selling their products as our business, right? So what that entails is you need to make sure that legal is involved. So for contract integration, you want to make sure that if you think about an integration, or if you think about how a business works, when they're selling something, they sign a contract. Well, they do this, the sales team does their thing, and then once the quote is accepted, they have to sign a contract with the customer. That contract obviously entails the services that will be provided. And so when you're then integrating this new entity into the acquired business, you have to work with legal to make sure that those contracts can be reassigned, or the contracts have language that this new company is comfortable with, right? So you have to work with legal. And before I actually go there, so this, all the steps I'm going to list out here is called contracts or revenue integration. Okay. So to integrate the revenue, again, you're thinking about the steps for revenue, right? Minus the sales, so after sales and after the quote and everything is done, legal, so you have to sign contracts. The next thing you do is, after you go from contracts, you think about the selling motion, right? So billing. So you have to do the billing integration. And really what that means is, whatever SKUs, I don't want to, should I go that deep?
No.
So there's something called SKUs, which SKUs basically represent what you're selling, and that's how the company is able to record it for revenue, right? So you need to make sure that the SKUs that are coming from these acquired entity, you need to make sure that they're integrated into your system. And then there's also the invoicing motion. So in some cases, you find that the acquired entity uses a completely different, what we call an ERP, which is where their invoicing happens and their financing and all that stuff. And so if that's the case, then even before you get to this point, you also have to sort of figure out the ERP integration as well, right? So that also entails working with technical teams to understand how it works on the acquired entities and how it works in the acquired companies, and then figure out if there's either synergies, or figure out things that need to be changed or built. In some cases, there's actually sometimes like an in-between, a build that some tech teams do to sort of make sure that you're able to process those invoices with this new system. So that would be billing integration, right? So you need SKUs from the acquired entity, and then you also need to invoice that entity. And then finally, you also have the finance integration. And again, if we're thinking about this from a revenue contracts and revenue integration standpoint, thinking about the flow of a typical sale, it starts from signing the contract. The customer obviously uses the product. Then you bill them. After you bill them, the company has to collect revenue, right? And so collecting that revenue, there's cash collection. So you have to work with the treasury teams to make sure that, if that company is still continuing to sell on their end, you need to make sure that they're remitting the cash to company A's books. But in terms of integration, it's the same thing. So it's just figuring out how best to integrate this process so that when company A sells the products of company B, everything is seamless. So the SKUs are recorded appropriately. The billing, so the invoicing goes out to the right customer with the right names. And as part of invoicing, there's also something here called customer onboarding, right? So you can't just onboard a customer just because they were acquired from company A. You still have to do the process of checking to make sure that there aren't any trade restrictions with that company, checking to make sure that their credit is good, because again, just because company B had them as a customer doesn't mean that they reach your own thresholds, right, as a company A for credit. So there's customer onboarding that also needs to be done as part of this billing integration. And then you get to the finance integration, again, working with finance teams to ensure that cash collection is integrated on their end, and all of the revenue reporting as well.
So quick question, Jen. How do you track this? From a program management standpoint, is it through tickets? Do you have a project plan?
Yeah, so usually we have a project plan, and this is literally the project plan. So the project plan, as a program manager, when I get assigned a new acquisition or on the flip side a divestiture, of course you have to have meetings, right? So the first sort of planning meeting is sort of just saying, all right, we've done this before. These are kind of the things that on the broad level, these are the major things we need to think about in order to integrate revenue, right? But of course, different companies have their own nuances, so there might be things that you might need to add to this. But essentially, the way we track it is just having calls, meetings, and a plan, and just making sure that we're tracking. So the teams are actually, so for example, legal is responsible for saying, all right, we know that we need to do the contract integration. What do you need to do? What are your steps, right? So they provide that. And then, same thing with billing. And then I guess as a program manager, my job is just really making sure that all of this is tracking, not just on the, tracking it to make sure that it's being done, but also tracking it on the timeline. So for acquisitions and post-acquisition integration, it's not as, I wouldn't say it's not as much of a risk, but it's not as tight of a deadline compared to a divestiture. Which, should I talk about divestitures as well? I don't know how deep. Okay, yeah. So essentially, this is a post-acquisition sort of 3-step framework, and then of course there are multiple milestones within each of these buckets that we would have to follow in order to fully integrate. And this could take up to however long it takes, because this also entails reviewing contracts, right? So imagine a company has hundreds of contracts. You have to work with the legal team to review each of them, to to bring out the contract languaging to make sure that the company is comfortable with that, right? SKUs, you also have to review the SKUs and do a mapping to make sure that you understand what the SKUs map to. And then there's also some cleanup that needs to be done as well in order to then onboard that into the system. And then of course the customer onboarding as well. There's a team that takes care of scanning the customer names against trade restrictions, just to make sure that there aren't any red flags or things to look out for. So these are the major steps and major buckets of integration for And again, this is just one part of integration, which is just the operations integration. There are other teams that do like product and tech integration, and there are other teams that do HR integration specifically for people. Product and tech is really just making sure that their product, if there's like remediations that need to be done to bring their products up to par with the acquiring entity, they have like steps that they need to take to do that.
Yeah. And then talk about, I guess, let's say from an acquisition standpoint, the company that's being bought, they also have like other members of their team, whether it's program managers, product owners, things like that. How does working with them, how does that play out? Like from your standpoint, you're the company that's doing, your company A in this case.
So how do I work with them?
Yeah.
So I mean, we definitely work hand in hand because, for example, for things like SKUs, for example, I actually did a project on this one where a company we acquired had like 10,000 lines of SKUs.
Yeah.
So I had to work with the acquired entity's sort of billing counterpart, which is like a program manager, to sort of like say, okay, what are these SKUs? How do we clean it up? And that was like a whole different project on its own within this program, right? So we definitely work very closely with the acquired entities teams to understand their business, right? And yeah, so we have to understand their business. There's also, lots of like workshops that we do to make sure that, and this is right after the company has been acquired, in order to kick off the work, we host a lot of workshops to sort of fully deep dive into how the business operates, how they sell, and what their operations model is. And then we can go in there and like start to sort of work through each of these items here.
Yeah, no, that's really good because I think a lot of times when people, we've talked about this on the pod, when you think about M&As, they just think about, okay, this company bought so-and-so, but under the hood, like outside of the legalities, because we know legal contracts can take a while, but from the integration piece, that can take months to years, depending on what it is that you're integrating, because, you have to, of course, import all the products, but make sure there's no duplicates. Like if your systems are very similar, you could have duplicates on the back end. You got to make sure there's like a one-to-one there, because if you can't bill somebody, then who's getting paid?
Exactly. And then in some cases, actually, so a full product integration could be that, we're just going to take the back end of that product and create a whole new product just using that, right? So that also takes a while before we then release our own, right? So it's definitely so one of the one acquisition that actually comes to mind right now, we've been doing this for like 3 years. The integration. So they got acquired 3 years ago, and we're still integrating because it's a lot of steps. But yeah, so these are like the major steps for an acquisition. Then I can do a divestiture on the flip side if there are any questions.
I think let's stop here.
Okay. Because I'm like...
I think this is good because this has like a lot of like detail in itself. And I know people are probably going to have questions like, because you can break down the product integration, HR integration, all that. Like you can, go down the loophole through those. But I think this is good. Okay. Divestitures, I think we can probably do maybe a second session when we get you, hopefully back. If you do decide to move down to ATL.
Well, see.
But yeah, I think this is good. If anybody has any questions, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so they can reach me, my personal IG handle, Jen Ike, JENAIK, or on LinkedIn at Jennifer Aikoroje.
Okay, awesome. And then if you have any additional questions, let us know at africansintechnology@gmail.com. Again, it's africansintechnology@gmail.com. Wherever you're watching this, we're going to have Jennifer's like social media handles, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you're watching this, we're going to have that. Let us know if you have any other questions. My name is Lebbie. This is Africans in Tech. We're building bridges and shaping futures in tech. All right, fam?